Let's come back from the lunch break, please. All right.
Okay.
The mouse works less well if I accidentally throw it across the room. All right. We are back after a lunch break, and I have a request. Ms. Katz, if you're on, please. And I think this will just take a second.
I don't see her.
Okay. So here's the request for confirmation. I hope this would be a quick confirmation. The plan is to complete modeling, the economic analysis, and small business before going to the Environmental Law Center direct. I mean, that's my understanding. Oh, there's Laura. Ms. Katz?
Yes, sorry, my computer's being really slow. I can hear everything you're saying, but I'm not being able to come up right away. So you say the order that you just said one more time?
So complete modeling, the NMOGA economic analysis and small business topics before moving to the Environmental Law Center direct, which I think is Pasquale. No?
No, so that's not the plan. I think what we would like, because we're trying to have the let's see. So yeah, I don't think Namoga's economist is available today, and my economist is not either. So what we're trying to have the economic analysis and small business facility go tomorrow, first and second. And so once we're done with the modeling, we're asking to move things up, like, so yes, the Environmental Law Centers direct, CCP direct, NAVA, and some of these other other topics, so that we can get through those today and start tomorrow with the economics.
Sorry, and to the extent that poses any kind of challenge to Professor Pisiniak, NAVA, CCP, I think he's going to have to communicate with you offline, I think would be best.
No challenge at all. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. DeSalen, for coming on screen as well. Mr. Rose, let's move to Mr. Blewett.
Yeah, Mr. Blewett's on. We need to, I guess, bring him into the inner sanctums here so that he can testify.
Okay, he's in purgatory, I guess. Let's bring him on. This will take me just a second. I'm sorry, for some reason I thought I had made him a panelist, but maybe I'm thinking of yesterday. All right, Mr. Blewett is a panelist, and will Mr. Blewett need presentation privileges?
He will, and it should be a very familiar exhibit because that's what he started with yesterday. And hopefully we've got him in the right slot here now for that exhibit. And for those folks who may not have seen their inbox this morning, we had an amendment to that, or an addition to that exhibit, which I circulated this morning. So there was an additional slide that is included in this amended slide deck.
Okay, thank you very much. He's on and he has presentation privileges.
And I guess he needs to turn on his camera and we'll have at it.
All
and
right,
I believe
Mr. Blewett is still under oath.
Okay. See if he's on. There he is. At least I think no, I guess not. Mr. Blewett, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you. Oh, there you are.
I can see him. I can see him.
I can see him now. Um, Mr. Blue, and for reference, Mr. Blewett's direct and rebuttal testimony is IPA&M Exhibit 6 for direct and 12 for rebuttal. And he'll be speaking as to that. Mr. Blewett, yesterday you explained or summarized your education and work background. With respect to modeling, could you advise the board on your experience, particularly as it relates to photochemical modeling?
Yes, I would be glad to. I've had a great deal of experience in being involved in photochemical modeling studies. Let me just kind of run down a list very quickly here. I was involved in the early regional haze RAP modeling work group. Uh, as the air quality control commissioner for the state of Colorado, I was deeply involved in the original SIP development for Denver and hosted a modeling series of modeling workshops to discuss the modeling that would be going on that. I've been involved in 3 different EIS applications with extensive development work by me regarding emission inventories for oil and gas sources that looked at decline for both NOx and VOCs. I was involved in the RAP West Jump project from the start and really got that work initiated and helped secure funding for that. I've published 2 peer-reviewed papers on stratospheric intrusion using Geochem and Chemex. And I participated extensively in the Four Corners modeling work that was done on the first go-around of the Four Corners task force.
And Mr. Blewett, is there anything in terms of your credentials that you wanted to add with respect to this topic?
Yes, I am a certified consulting meteorologist, and I have been since 1985.
Mr. Blewett, can you give us a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony? And if you want to go ahead and use the PowerPoint presentation, I think
Yes.
it would be a time. Madam Hearing Officer, does he have presentation rights here?
Is that showing up?
Not yet.
The share button ought to work for you.
There we go. It's
There we go.
If you'd make it bigger, I guess.
What I'd like to do is, I'd like to go back to this first slide that we talked about yesterday. And I'd like to highlight several points on this slide. I think there's an issue of significance that we need to think about. A lot of the controls benefits that we're talking about are less than a ppb. And I think the accuracy of those estimates, and that's what models provide us, are really, you're in the area where some of these may not be really significant. They may not be real. They may be just totally lost in the uncertainty of the model. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that the error bars on those calculations are really probably quite big. I don't have things that I can point to, but that's sort of my gut level reaction with them, and based on 40 years of modeling. The next point I'd like to make is, we talked about this yesterday, but I really want to go back to this. The concept of, we have a base case for 2028, which is not well defined. I'll talk more about that later. But Mr. Baca said that that might not be federally enforceable. And I think from talking as a former regulator being on the Colorado Air Commission and as somebody who has worked for industry for a number of years, that leaves a lot of uncertainty because a single source can't have two sets of emission limits, one which reflect federally enforceable and the other that are only state enforceable for the same pollutant. So I think NMED really and the board really need to think about this issue of enforceability and what do these, whatever ultimate plan you implement, what does that mean in terms of regulation and and enforceability by other parties? Um,
Mr. Blewett, is it
yes,
possible to expand the size of your slide there?
sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay.
That's better, thank you.
Um, I talked about this yesterday, and I want to expand upon this further. Mr. Morris identified the 2014 base case, and uh, and we talked about the 2028 future year base case. Now, I think this needs to be discussed a little bit more because it's not a simple answer as Mr. Morris alluded to. I looked through the entire RAP website more than once, and I was unable to find any documentation on what was in this base case inventory. And I think for the board and NMED, this is important because this ultimately will be somehow involved in some sort of regulation. And I also, in the technical support document, there were two references to inventories that were used to develop it. I requested those inventories through NMED. I received them, and unfortunately, there was not enough. There was no details other than a tabular list of numbers and emission rates that you could actually confirm those emission rates. I I have also done some work reviewing the Mancos EIS, and the Mancos EIS is related to this work through the four-state modeling effort that was done by New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, maybe it's a three-state. And in looking at the work that was done for Mancos, BLM did account for decline in that inventory, but only included it for greenhouse gas emissions. They did not include it for compressors. And so I really have doubts whether decline was properly accounted for or not. That may be a moot point in some respects, other than to say the emission inventory may likely overestimate emissions. The modeling results provide a picture that I think is quite important for everyone to understand. And then there's the last case, which is the 2028 future year case with additional controls on oil and gas. And the point I want to make here is that unless the 2028 base case is implemented, the controls on oil and gas will not satisfy the objectives that were have in this hearing. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay. I think we can just skip that slide. I pretty much covered that. This is a slide that's from a combination of table 4.6, 4.7, and 4.9 in the technical support document. And what you see is, and unfortunately, what's in the technical support document tends to look at the differences as percents, not absolute values. So there was a 17,000 ton per year increase in oil and gas emissions for non-point, which is basically wells. And then and that number may be overstated, it's hard to say given the information. And then there's a 28,000 ton per year decrease compared to that 31,000 in the 2028 base case. The other thing I want to mention with respect to this is there is a discrepancy in VOC emissions in the tables between table 4.6, 4.7, and 4.9 that it's probably is not terribly important in this context, but it's something that could be resolved. Okay, we've talked a lot about decline, and oil and gas sources are really unique. Production declines exponentially over time. And then when you start adding in, as those decline, you drill new wells and you're adding new production in, but those start declining. So it becomes somewhat of a complex picture in terms of what actual production is. Production tends to grow slowly if the rate of drilling is accelerating. So the reason oil and gas operations are continually drilling is to replace reserves that have declined. And for emission sources such as compressors, dehighs, and tanks, those will all show decline in emissions over time. And how you look at those declines is really important in terms of dealing with regional air quality. And the last point is a point I've continually made, is the documentation, which is really important for NMED and the board to understand what's in this inventory. This is a slide from the Rambo report. It's modified, I believe, slightly. But what you notice is the two orange squares here, those are the two areas that are non-attainment at the moment. The yellow highlight are areas of monitoring that are above the 95%. So you got 68 ppb here, 67 equal to it, 67 equal to it, 67, 69. But the issue is when you implement the changes in that base case, everything is below that 67 parts per billion, except the Desert View monitor, which is at that. So you're getting
Mr. Blewett, I'm sorry again to interrupt. Is there a way for you to make that the full screen? That really is impossible for us to read.
Sure. I'm going to do, how about that?
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So the issue is that, for the San Juan Basin, after we include the base case here, the 2028 base case, all of the concentrations predicted at the monitors are well below the standard. So the fact that, and we've seen a 5 ppb decrease in concentrations, and yet when we add the oil and gas controls, we're seeing 0.3, 0.8 at Bloomfield, 1.5 at Navajo Lake, but we're only at 64.8 ppb at that site. So the fact that you're reducing concentrations here, the concentrations are well below the level of the standard. And if you look at Carlsbad, and this is older monitoring data, this is what Rambo looked at, but that's the base case takes you down to 6.7 or 66.7, reduced to 2.3, but the additional oil and gas only got 0.3. So we're really not seeing, as Mr. McNally said, we're seeing a very modest reduction, some of which may be lost in the noise of the model. The only large reductions are at Navajo Lake and Substation, and there the concentrations are well below the standard. And in working in compliance demonstration, attainment demonstration, it tends to be a balancing act. You kind of make things better at one place, but may increase it at another place. So I think it's important to keep in mind the actual concentration for the future year base case, as well as the amount of reduction. But this basically says if you want to comply with the 95%, or you want to use that for a plan, this 2028 base case really gets most of the monitors, with the exception of Desert View, into compliance with your level. So this tends to be your plan. This is kind of a tertiary benefit of using oil and gas. And looking at this in another way, what you see on this slide is this graphically. So at Navajo Lake, you started out at 67. By implementing the base case, future year base case, you get down to 65 ppb, and you're only decreasing to 63.3. And if you look over on this slide, here's the decrease of 2.2, and Navajo Lake is the oil and gas is reducing 1.5, but you're talking about concentrations of 65 ppb, 5 ppb below the standard. So it simply looking at reductions without the context of what the real total concentration is that the population is exposed to, tends to be misleading. This is the same presentation for Carlsbad City. Rambo did not analyze Carlsbad National Park, but what you see is, 67, and the base case for Carlsbad City is only reducing it 0.3 ppb. And remember, these are for NOx and VOCs controls combined. I think Mr. McNally presented a very useful analysis of NOx versus VOC. And I think as a first approximation, what he showed was the really insignificant results in terms of ozone regarding VOC controls. And when you and Mr. Morris indicated that many of the grid cells where you were seeing an increase in ozone were close to major NOx sources. So I think the issue is when you look at the issue of VOC controls, it's important to look at where the VOC increases are causing increases in emissions and where they're located and what is the magnitude of those ozone levels. And that has not been presented. Again, that's sort of a technical side issue. Let me just conclude here. I really feel pretty strongly that the 2028 future year base case is really the plan that you need to implement for staying within 95% of the NACs. I think it would be very interesting to look at the issue of NOx versus VOCs. I think that's something that is really sort of deficient. And I agree with Mr. McNally that it would have been very nice to have those done up front. I think the documentation regarding the emission inventory is important for the board because they're ultimately going to have to deal with this in a regulatory constraint. I think that's really all I have to say. I'll be glad to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Blewett and Mr. Rose. We are just a few minutes from our 1 o'clock public comment session. So, Mr. Blewett, I have, I believe, just four commenters, I believe, and then we will turn to your questioning. So, sorry, let me get rid of the presentation mode for you. Hold on. I'll give it back to you shortly, Mr. Blewett.
Okay.
All right. So we are at the 1 o'clock public comment period for day 2 of the hearing. Let me give you the names of the folks I have who reached out on email to request this slot. If you are on the platform and you would like to make public comment and did not reach out by email, that is perfectly fine. Simply reach out to us in the chat here, which is enabled for everyone. And if you have any trouble reaching out on chat, please call or text 505-660-4305. So here are the names of the folks, and I'll call you in this order. Kendra Pinto, JT Stewart, Cliff Stock, Marcy Bachowski, John Waters, and Jennifer Grassom. So let me look for Ms. Pinto first. And public comment is limited to 5 minutes, and it is given by audio, not video. So let's see, Kay. I don't see Ms. Pinto on here. It goes Caitlin, Kiefer, Ken, Kim. So nope. In the event Ms. Pinto joins us, I'm happy to unmute her. Let me try JT Stewart. Sorry, it just takes a moment to, no, I don't see JT Stewart. I saw him earlier, I believe, but not right now. Let me move to Cliff Stock. Mr. Stock on with us. No, I don't. Oh, you know what? I see some new call-in users. Sorry here. I'm going to unmute caller 10. Caller 10, will you please identify yourself? Caller 10? I've unmuted you. Okay, caller 10 may have stepped away. Let me unmute caller 12. Caller 12, can you hear me?
Madam Hearing Officer,
Oh,
this is Andrew Knight.
Andrew Knight?
And I have dialed in because I'm having connectivity issues.
Okay, so I know that you're caller 12. I'm going to, I don't think I can make you a panelist. I'm just going to mute you, or perhaps you could just mute yourself, Mr. Knight.
Will do.
All right, thank you. Let me see if I have any other call-in users. I don't. All right, so I don't see Mr. Stock. Who is next? Marcy Wachowski. And I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing your name. Hold on. No. Well, I'm striking out here. And let's see, John Waters. I think I remember Mr. Waters from the Water Quality Control Commission. Mr. Waters, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Terrific. Yes, very clearly. So I'm going to start your clock at 5 minutes. Let me ask you first, though, to raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment on this. I am John Waters. I am the Executive Director for the Carlsbad Department of Development. As Felicia mentioned, I'm also a former member of the Water Quality Control Commission. I was a wastewater superintendent and an environmental manager and an environmental regulator in my past life, probably the only economic development director with advanced degrees in environmental biology. It's a strange path we run on. I'm going to please ask you to consider, while considering this methane regulation, I want to ask you to think about the amount of methane that's actually out there, human-caused methane that's out there, and the magnitude of what's out there above and beyond the smaller sources that you anticipate looking at. And of course, the San Juan mine always sticks up. At least in 19, its methane emission was metric tons wise of carbon dioxide of methane was 565,000, and that's way up there. But if you look at the top 10 out of the top 15 methane sources there are in the state of New Mexico, by far and above landfills are your biggest problem, and there's a lot of those that are uncapped at all. And I do want you to consider the magnitude of the amount that even the smaller landfills that are out there, and even some of the capped landfills, still emit a significant portion of methane into the atmosphere. And if you're looking for the best bang for your buck as far as the state goes to maybe regulate and look at a little harder, I would suggest that you first of all take a very strong look at the landfills across the state of New Mexico and see how that can be captured, because by far that is a much bigger bang for your buck than going after and having to regulate an industry with numerous 44,000 wells across the state of New Mexico. The amount of money and the amount of time necessary to regulate that, given the fact that these wells don't emit per well a significant portion of methane into the atmosphere. I think the board would definitely get better bang for their buck, better regulatory bang, better ability to control methane if they focused heavily on the landfills in the state of New Mexico, because they do contribute a significant amount. Coal-fired power plants and other things, the coal industry That is being looked at really heavily. Obviously, there's a power plant up north that's getting ready to shut down, but there is a significant amount of methane that comes from those. If we've had people talk about refineries and different things of that nature. They're far down on the scale as far as point sources of emission. So I would suggest that rather than focus regulations on an industry that is so spread out, and even collectively, it still doesn't rate up to what the entire New Mexico gas transmission system rates across the state as far as total metric tons of emission on an annual basis. Definitely going after 15 or 20 landfills, and even helping out with, from the state side, with monetary resources to cap those landfills and collect that gas would be a far better use of the state's, both the regulatory might of the state as well as the monetary resources that the state has. I think the oil and gas industry has a lot of benefits. People are going to talk about those on our education and things to come. And they've done a lot of voluntary work. We've seen it down here in the Carlsbad area across the board, whether it's on the midstream industry or upstream or even downstream. There's been a lot of voluntary work, and I know that they've been willing to continue to move forward. There are new midstream plants moving in. The number of flared wells are going to be dropping as soon as the infrastructure is in here. I just think that at this particular time in our, if we're truly looking at trying to reduce human impact on methane emission from the state of New Mexico, go after those 15 or 20 sources out there and see if we can't do something to capture that methane before going after something that is so spread out across the state of New Mexico and so difficult to enforce. So thank you again for your time. I do appreciate it. We're very supportive of the industry down here, as you can imagine. But I think if you're looking at methane, you got a bigger animal to hunt, so to speak.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Waters.
Thanks.
I believe I saw Jennifer Grassom. Here we are. Ms. Grassom, I'm unmuting you. Can you hear me? Yes, I can.
Great.
This is Felicia Orth. You're on the public comment session. Public comment is taken by audio and is limited to 5 minutes. All comment has to be given under oath. If you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Grassom, and I am the president and CEO of the Economic Development Corporation of Lee County. My story is inextricably linked to the oil and gas industry. As an almost lifelong resident of Hobbs, New Mexico, I would have a hard time actually telling you how the oil and gas industry has not impacted me. I'm the daughter of a school teacher and an oil field worker, and not only did the oil and gas industry support my family directly through my father's employment, but as a public school teacher, my mother's employment was supported in no small part by the oil and gas industry. As I'm sure you know, last year, oil and gas provided $1.4 billion for public schools and higher education. And I'm here today as a product of the Hobbs Municipal Schools, as are my 3 children, 2 of whom are currently in an elementary school in Hobbs. Oil and natural gas is an essential part of New Mexico's economy, responsible for more than 134,000 New Mexico jobs and 18.8 billion in economic activity. But it would be a mistake to think about the oil and gas industry as this monolith. There's incredible diversity in the industry, from large global producers to small mom and pop family businesses. The stories of first-generation immigrants, my neighbors, coming to this country, buying 1 truck, then 2 trucks, and eventually running 20 trucks with 30 employees, these stories are everywhere in Lee County. These entrepreneurs not only support local families, but they provide civic leadership in our communities. They sponsor local girls softball teams. They volunteer in the soup kitchen. Really, these families in the oil and gas industry make countless contributions to the great quality of life in Lee County. I'd encourage you to adopt more flexible regulations that respond to the diversity present in oil and gas. We've already heard that one size fits all are having unintended consequences, such as shutting in significant production, and especially concerning forcing small businesses to close. As New Mexicans, we celebrate diversity, creativity, and caring for our neighbors. The industry is investing in developing advanced technologies to limit emissions and reduce environmental footprint and production. As New Mexicans, we don't settle for either or. We're wired for both and. We can meet policy objectives while continuing to support economic growth and job creation. I completely support efforts to protect our air and natural resources, but we shouldn't balance this on the backs of New Mexico working families. The course we are on today will simply drive work and wealth to Texas. Through more flexible regulation, New Mexico can be in the driver's seat for developing creative solutions to reduce emissions, not only in New Mexico, but around the world. Thank you for this opportunity today to provide an on-the-ground perspective of how this proposed rule will impact me, my family, and my community in Lee County. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grassom. Let's see, I have someone reaching out through chat. Ann McCartney. Let me find Ann McCartney here. Ms. McCartney, I am unmuting you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very nice. You're on the public comment session. Public comment is limited to 5 minutes and must be taken under oath. If you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to make public comment on these important rules. My name is Ann McCartney, and I am co-chair of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, which is a faith-based organization addressing the issues around climate change. I would like to first bring to the attention of the board that the recent IPCC report, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, emphasized that the first and most important thing we can do is to make rapid reductions in methane emissions. Methane has, over a period of 20 years in the atmosphere, 85 times more global warming potential than CO2. Therefore, rapid removal of methane leaks and waste would have a dramatic effect, while also helping to limit other pollutants that create warming and worsen air quality. New Mexico is positioned to be a leading state in reducing methane waste and leaks. It is my understanding that the proposed rule is certainly a step in the right direction. It's strong, and it's important, first of all, that the board adopt the rule, but also to strengthen it so that we are a leading state in reducing methane and the VOCs, or the VOCs emissions, for our very precious state. Those additional strengths, or the requirements that would strengthen the existing proposed rule, would be to have more protections for people who live close to the development or the production from oil and gas wells by having more frequent inspections. The second requirement that needs to be added is inclusion of strong requirements for the completion and development of those wells, so that the methane is not, and the VOCs are not released at the time they're completed or redeveloped. The third requirement that I would ask the board to consider including would be about the pneumatic controllers. That pneumatic controllers need to be inspected, and the state needs to make sure that there's an acceleration of a timeline to retrofit existing equipment for zero bleed and zero emission controllers. My husband suffers from asthma. The continuing result of the methane emissions and the VOCs emissions from our Permian Basin development and what's occurred already in the northwest portion of the state has impacted the air quality for New Mexicans across the state. And now with the increase of the greenhouse gas emissions raising the temperature across New Mexico and across the world, we are experiencing increased fires and smoke and the air quality has been extremely poor, not only this year, but in previous years. This impacts a lot of people in terms of their ability to breathe. If you can't breathe, it's really hard to stay alive. So I cannot more strongly urge this board to undertake adopting and strengthening the proposed rules that came from the New Mexico Environment Department. I appreciate your time and consideration of these comments.
Thank you, Ms. McCartney. We'll turn next to Sharon Wilson. I have a few people reaching out by chat here. Ms. Wilson, I am unmuting you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You're a little soft.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, just keep your voice up if you would. We're making a transcript. Public comment is taken under oath and is limited to 5 minutes. If you would raise your right hand, do you
Okay.
swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. My name is Sharon Wilson. I'm Senior Field Advocate and OGI Thermographer for Earthworks. Thank you for taking my testimony. I worked for the oil and gas industry. The pay was great, but I left because their ethics are not great. I bought beautiful land in the country where my sons and animals could run free, but the impacts from living near oil and gas drove me away from my home and toward my life's work, helping others who are suffering from those same impacts. In 2014, I became a certified optical gas imaging thermographer. I have the same certification and use the same equipment industry and regulators use. I have documented emissions at many thousands of oil and gas sites throughout the U.S. and other countries, and that includes hundreds of sites in New Mexico. I have more experience and time behind an OGI camera than many regulators or industry thermographers. My video evidence is credible evidence. It deserves that presumption. Here's what I've learned from years of documenting oil and gas emission sources in New Mexico. The term leaks is frequently misused regarding methane emissions. What I see most often are equipment malfunctions and routine intentional releases. Some are part of the system design, and some are deliberate dumping of methane gas. Operators, whether large or small, cannot keep flares lit or properly operating. Unlit venting flares and flares with incomplete combustion are prevalent. Operators do not maintain Enardo-type pressure valves. Instead, they use them as a way to dump methane gas into the air. At least 19 workers have died opening tank hatches to sample and gauge liquids. The hatches are left open or they become corroded and emit constantly. I even see this practice at sites with vapor recovery. What is the point of vapor recovery when tank hatches are opened, allowing the gas to escape? Vapor recovery systems malfunction often. I've documented them emitting for days, weeks, months without penalty. Most are dependent on reliable electricity and some on proper flare operation. Without those, there's no vapor recovery. But we find vapor recovery malfunctions for many other reasons. Blowdowns of pipelines and compressor stations are routine and often unreported. Any rules must target all blowdowns and pipeline pigging. Some of the worst emission events I've seen come from completions and recompletions. People living and working anywhere near oil and gas facilities need protection with stronger rules and more frequent inspections. Methane rules are not enough, and rules are only words on paper without vigilant investigations and meaningful penalties. Colorado has good rules, but those do not translate to significant improvements in the field or relief for families living in the oil and gas patch. Don't permit new sites unless you have the capacity to enforce your rules. Right now, you clearly do not have that capacity. The International Energy Agency and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change agree that what is most needed is a halt to new oil and gas investment and a rapid and just transition away from fossil fuels to 100% renewable energy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Okay, I don't have anyone else who reached out by chat to make comment. Let me see if I still had a call-in user that we did not identify. I'll try one more time with call-in user 10. Call-in user 10, can you hear me, and will you identify yourself? Okay. That's all we have, I think, for this public comment session. Let's return to the technical case. Let's see. At some point, we do have a board member request of the department to identify the entity that would oversee landfill emissions. But let's turn to Mr. Blewett's questioning before we return to any department statements. Mr. Blewett, I'm going to give you presentation privileges again. Just give me a second. You can pull your slides back up if you'd like. You should have that privilege now. So let's turn first to either Mr. Katz or Ms. Katz or Mr. Knight.
No questions from the department.
Thank you. Ms. Fox?
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Paranos?
Thank you. I have no questions for this witness.
All right. Professor Pasiniak?
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you. Ms. DeVore?
Questions. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Nykiel?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Mr. DeSalen?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Mr. Heiser?
No questions. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right. Mr. Jano? I don't hear Mr. Jano.
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Boutier.
No questions, thank you.
All right, Ms. Gutierrez.
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Mr. Kolklischer. I don't hear anything.
This is Casey Spall for the Commercial Disposal Group. There are no questions.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Schwal. And Ms. Witherspoon.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Going to turn now to the board members. In the event they have questions while I'm doing that, if you are an attendee and have a question of Mr. Blewett, please reach out through the chat and we'll make that happen. So, Madam Chair, do you have questions of Mr. Blewett?
No questions at this time, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions here, thank you.
All right. Member Bitzer.
No questions.
Okay, Member Duval. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I do have some questions. And this is a point of clarification. So what we're looking at with all of the tables and figures, we're looking at the output from the model data. And I'm still a little confused as to what the input parameters are. And I asked this to one of the previous presenters as far as what they were using as far as weather input, and that was only for 2014. I think he did a good job answering that. I'm wondering what exactly are this is to Mr. Blewett, like what climate and weather inputs do you put into this model, like specifically the Ramble?
The model uses as input meteorological data that is obtained from the WRF forecasting model that is run in a historical mode. So it uses observations from various locations, and then it computes wind fields over the domain over the various grid sizes that Mr. Morris talked about. So in the 36-kilometer grid, you are looking at a uniform wind over 36 kilometer in vertical layers, and each of those vertical layers will have different wind speeds. As you get down to 4 kilometers, you're using smaller and smaller pieces. But what you're really looking at is you're looking at historical data based on observations and meteorological modeling. And ideally, you should be modeling more years, additional years of meteorological data, because as you were told by Mr. Morris, what you're really doing, and Mr. McNally, you're really referencing everything to a specific state of meteorological conditions. Now, the questions you're asking are very, very good. One of the things you have to remember is this modeling is incredibly computer resource intensive. From my experience a number of years ago, and I think it's probably not as bad as what I'm going to say now, but to run 24 hours of data through the CAMEX model, not including the meteorological model, not including the emission processing model, is about real time. So 24 hours of computer time would be needed to run one day of simulation. And what you do is you parse it out to different processors. So the issue of making many model runs becomes a resource limit in terms of computer power. And I think the question you're asking and the way I would address this is taking the most recent data in terms of years of meteorological data, running that through WRF for the current climate conditions, and compare it to 2014 and see what you get. That at least gives you 2 data points that you could maybe extrapolate, but unfortunately things here are not linear.
Yeah, and I fully I've done quite a bit of modeling work, so I fully appreciate that. I guess I should phrase this a little more like higher order. I guess I'm still a little confused of what the input parameters are, as far as like if you're also looking at things like evapotranspiration, interactions with greenhouse gas, soil parameters, UV input, because that's clearly an important aspect of ozone formation. So I guess we can talk about the nuts and bolts maybe offline at some other point, but.
Mr. Blewett, I'm sorry to interrupt, Member Duvall. Mr. Blewett, I'm seeing that you're having some struggles with video. My suggestion would be to turn off your video and remain unmuted for the rest of the questions. Things are cutting in and out a little bit, and I see a little yellow flag for you. I'm sorry, Member Duvall, please go ahead.
No, that's just for everyone else. My principal question was, I just want to know what the inputs are to the model, because all we've really seen is the outputs. We've seen the data and the models project this, they project that, but models are only as good as what you put into them. So I was just trying to get a better handle on that. That was really my only question. Sorry if it took me a while to get there.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
Questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Member Honker.
Is Mr. Blewett still on?
He is still on and he's unmuted, but he was clearly having bandwidth issues. Mr. Blewett, can you hear us? Oh gosh. Okay, now we've lost him altogether. Excellent question, Member Honker. we lost him right there. Let's give him a moment in the event he can rejoin us.
Yeah, I did have a question for him, but I wanted to make sure he was available.
Yeah. And one possibility, Mr. Rose, is for you to put him on speaker. You might be trying to do that right now.
I was trying to text him to see what the problem is.
Okay.
And Madam Hearing Officer, if I may.
Yes.
I need to go take students out to the desert to do field work right now. But if I could put my question in the chat that you could ask, I really just have a pretty simple question about model input, and also if the model is freely available, that way that it could be evaluated. And this is perhaps a question for the state, but if there is the source code available in Python or R or C++, something like that, that could be evaluated by the public in an open source manner, I would be interested to know if that's the case.
See, thank you. If you put it in the chat, I'll be sure to pose it
Absolutely.
in your words.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Madam Hearing Officer, it appears that Mr. Blewett's computer froze, so I don't know if he's going to be on here.
So he hasn't joined the attendees yet, which I think is where I would find him.
Looks like he's trying to phone me. I suppose I could answer.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to wait just a moment because it seems like we're very close to being done with the witness, and I'd like to
You're pretty much done anyway. Okay, no problem. And most of I think we can do later too, but let me get back on. Hold on. Madam Hearing Officer, he's going to have to reboot, but he is going to testify later as well. So.
Okay. So, Member Honker, would you make a note of your question, please? And I'm going to make a note of Member Duvall's question. And when Mr. Blewett is back with us, we will reopen this particular discussion.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Can,
Ms. Katz?
excuse me, Madam Hearing Officer. Can somebody remind me when what Mr. Blewett is testifying?
Yeah, just
When
text
he's
me when you're
testifying again? Lou, you're not muted.
I know, he's gonna reboot, we'll be on shortly, so. It was Mr. Blue on the phone.
Would it help if we just took a 10-minute break?
It may, I hate to delay it, and I think most of the questions were done, but if you want to take a 5 to 10-minute break, hopefully he can get back on. If not, I mean, he is testifying later, not that that's optimal, but we can certainly make him available. Answer these questions.
Mr.
later
Rose, when
today.
is he testifying later?
He's testifying in response to some of the Wild Earth Guardians proposals as to.
Okay.
And I think there may be one other area where he's testifying as well. So I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. You probably do, but at least as to the Wild Earth Guardians proposal, he filed rebuttal
Yes, that'll
testimony in
be,
response. So.
yes, okay, thank you for reminding me of that.
So if I get a text from him that he's back on, hopefully I'll let you know. But I don't know if it's an equipment problem or a bandwidth related problem. So.
Okay.
We'll see.
So let's just take 10 minutes. We'll come back. I will monitor the attendee list, Mr. Rose. We'll take 10 minutes, come back at 1:45. And if Mr. Blewett hasn't rejoined us by then, we'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.